All right, good evening, everybody. At this time, if we could all please rise if able for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, at this time, I will turn it over to Superintendent Schwartz to go over our work session portion of the budget.
And Mr. Giaquinto will be assisting me this evening. So as we get started tonight,
I just need to be close.
when you're near me, it always helps. Thank you. All right, so these are our goals for this evening. I want to respond to any questions you might have from last week. I want to talk to you a bit about your non-negotiables in relation to the carry-forward budget. And I want to discuss the adoption of a spending cap, reminding the board that that is what we adopt, is a spending cap. So as we begin tonight, we'll just center ourselves in our work. So do we have any questions from last time around that we could answer for you? I didn't get any, so it's fine if there are not. Hearing none. So I want to talk to you a little bit about our list here and tell you where we are with some of these things so that you have a sense of what we're doing. So I would tell you that when we think about those things that you see as non-negotiables, certainly we would agree that the SRO is a non-negotiable, and if we could, we would bring our CRO to full-time, the Community Resource Officer. At this point, though, in the carry-forward budget, we're carrying enough to pay 20 hours, so that's what we had this year. We don't have the additional money for the CRO at this time. We are, however, working very closely with Chief Harrigan and Danielle Penk and Officer Eckert to see if we can come up with a grant, locate some grant money, work through something to get that person with us full time. Drew is also working with Chief Harrigan on the contract. So we're trying to do what we can, but I don't want you to think that at this point in the budget that position's full-time. It is not. We are carrying forward exactly what we have in place right now. The same is true of the athletic trainer, who is not full-time, as you know, but is here for after-school and evening events by and large. But we did not increase his time. We rolled forward our current service.
Susan, can I clarify on the CRO?
Of course you may.
The CRO is there is no funds allocated in the general fund. It's in the CARES Act to roll over money. We can probably cover the 20 hours a week, but not in the general, in the federal fund.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mental health services, we will continue with our in-house people and also working with Saratoga Center for the Family. But at this point, we don't have an increase there. Student support services, you remember last week I showed you our staffing, or the week before. We took a look at enrollments last year, and I said to you at one of those nights, and we'll say again, everyone in this room would tell you we have more needs than we can meet. I think in a perfect world, there would be lots of things we would do here if money were no object. However, I would just remind the board that you've done a really good job of trying to move things forward and still be mindful of both the tax levy cap and also what our community can bear. So we're not anticipating increases in either of those things. We will continue to offer acceleration opportunities, particularly at the high school, university and the high school, SCCC, those kinds of things, CTE, but we're not, again, looking for an increase. So basically what I'm telling you about your non-negotiables is that we've preserved everything we had, but I would be remiss if I led you to believe I think there's room in the budget to increase any of those things at this point. So here's what I'm trying to get us to. I want to start moving towards planning for our actual and anticipated enrollment, understanding that those numbers could fluctuate. I want to maintain our programs and services for students, and this budget does a good job of that. I personally want to keep the district at or preferably below a possible tax rate of 3.13. You know from looking at our historical data last week, we have only been above 3, I think, twice in the last 10 years. We've actually gone negative 3 times, and we have kept pretty much right around 2 or there, slightly there under. You may have a different feeling about what the community would be willing to support than I do, and that's something we should be talking about. And then again, I want to remind you that you are adopting a spending cap. So you're going to tell us in the community, who will then vote on our budget, what the actual limit of what we can spend is. There is always room under that cap for wiggling some things around, because we have to be prepared to address things that come up that we didn't expect. For example, the year we got COVID and had to go buy a ton of PPE, which was never in our budget. So there is room for some movement, and you know sometimes we will wait until a little bit in the year to see if we can make something happen. But you are adopting a spending cap. Drew spoke last week a bit about contingency budget, but I'd like him to do that again for me tonight.
So the contingency budget basically is that after your first budget is turned down, you have one more shot to go out to the public. You can go out with the same budget again or a different budget. If that budget fails, you must go out with a tax levy that equals the prior year adopted tax levy. So it's a zero growth tax levy budget. So what I'm showing you there is we went out with that first draft. It'd be $1,286,000 we'd have to cut to reach last year's levy. So $1,003,000 is a big drop. That'd be the 4% drop.
Do folks have questions about contingent budgets? Would you like a little refresher about what kinds of things we have to look at in a contingent budget?
I think that would be a good idea.
You would lose, the board has to establish or adopt what a contingency expense is, but you must maintain the core requirements as set by education law. I sound like a superintendent, I'm not. But, so things like sports aren't required, field trips aren't required, late buses aren't required, certain electives aren't required. So a lot of that stuff's going to go to maintain your core educational requirements at a zero growth budget. So it's pretty much a devastation to what schools are about. You cannot buy any equipment that isn't approved as part of the contingency budget. So I just can't come to you and say, a truck broke down, I need it. That's off the table too. So it really ties your hands on how you can spend your money under a contingent budget.
And could you talk a bit about reducing each of the 3 major components by?
Yeah, sure. When a budget's adopted, the state requires us to report 3 parts, program, capital, and administration. Capital is your, like building and grounds, your health and safety. Program is your instructional and your transportation, and I think administration speaks to itself what that is. So the time you go to a contingent budget, you must cut in proportion to the two-part budget. Proportion that admin and instruction were to the two-part budget. So you just can't cut all teachers and teaching assistants. You got to cut admin, general support to stay in the same proportion. You're not there yet. I'll show you that proportion when you adopt the budget, but usually it's about 11, 12% administration, 70-something% is the program, and the balance is capital. It's pretty consistent every year, the three parts, but when you go to contingent, you look at a two-part, administration and program, and they must stay in proportion to the last adopted or defeated budget, whichever is a less percent of administration to the overall. Pretty confusing, but that's not.
Oh, no, you can go, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So last week, I should first ask, any questions for Drew about contingent? Okay, and we'll come back and talk about that. So last week we had talked a bit, you had suggested that I think about what I would do if we were trying to get under that 3.13% that we anticipate the tax rate will be. Where would I go looking? So at present, a percent on the tax rate is $330,000. So if I want to get down under 3 and I'm looking to cut by 1%, these would be the things that we would be looking at. So you can see that high school science teacher is retirement, that we would not replace that person. You know that the section reallocation at elementary school, last week I showed you that right now we have 6 sections of kindergarten as opposed to 8 that we know of. And we would safely call 7 and anticipate 1 reduction there. Our Wilson reading teacher, who is our certified Wilson reading instructor, we would reduce that position by half. She's also a retiree who retired earlier this year, so it's not a full-time position. We'd take IT contractual down by 10,000. Admin replacement hires, as of today, that's real money, since we are almost there. And the buildings and grounds truck that we had talked about, we would either try to do that this year out of existing funds, and then we would not take it forward next year. So that would get us to about 239. And then Drew has taken a look at where we could increase revenue projections. Katie Nagel, to her credit, is doing an incredible job with Medicaid and billing for things that we might not have billed for in the past or gone after so aggressively. So he's confident in that $55,000, and then also the interest income. Drew, would you like to say anything else about any of that? Alrighty, so here's what those second draft impacts look like if we were to do them. Drew, could you speak to this?
So the first draft budget, which shows the $63,198,425, the revisions that Susan showed on the previous slide are 238,000. Is that 843 comes off. So your spending limit would be 62,959,582, or 4.45% spending increase. The first draft of the budget was a 4.85, so it comes down by that much. The tax levy on the first draft, you can see, is a 32,833,008. The revenue from the other 2 sources brings down the tax levy because it shifts to another side. And then the expense reduces the tax levy by that $238,000. So all told, you'd have a 2.99% levy increase which is a decrease from the first draft, which was 4.08%. That's 941,814 more than the previous year. So your contingent budget drop is only 942,000 instead of the bigger number you saw earlier. Again, the first draft levy was 32.8. Now it's 32.459. I think it's, or 89. I'm sorry. So that's 343,843 decrease in the levy from the first draft. The tax rate, by dropping the levy down, will actually go down to 2.09%, which first draft was 3.17. So it gets us more in line with the historical 2 and 2 we showed last board meeting, which was the 2% spending and the 2% rate increases.
So we're ready for questions. We'll come back. Yes.
What's the effect of reducing the IT contract by $10,000?
Don't look at Sylvie. We should be fine.
Okay.
No, seriously, we will be fine. We'll kind of pick around the edges of some things and
Okay.
protect our rights. We're not asking you to make a decision tonight. We're asking you to consider this as a second potential phase. I am anxious to hear, or would like to hear from the board, what you think the appetite in the community, from your connections in the community, might be to going out and being over, potentially being over 3 on the tax rates and not doing these things. I'm just curious.
I actually was going to ask you, kind of generally, where do we get the information for, if we're looking at something like mental health services, where do we get the information to know which ones are actually working and maybe which ones aren't working before we just say we're going to continue these services? I mean, there's still, some of them are still sort of new, so how do we know if they're working? So I was wondering if, generally speaking, do we have any way to collect information from the community when we have these kinds of questions? Is there any kind of instrument that we can distribute that says, today, now, or this week, what is the general feeling about these things, so that we're not just a group of people over in another room making decisions about the people that we're supposed to be helping, and other than them just showing up to vote on the budget, how do we know what the staff and what the community actually does want?
In the past, especially when we've been faced with budget reductions, we generally have community budget work sessions where we talk about those things with the community and get a flavor for what they're looking for. I think this is the first year in, I can't remember how long, that we actually haven't had to reduce the budget to get under or to the tax levy. So it's been a while, but we've used that strategy before. I think what folks, well, first I would say this, Emily, I wouldn't bring something forward for the board to consider unless I felt it was working. I think the bigger question is how much we have of those kinds of things, given the number of people who need those services. And I talk to my team regularly, and I know there are always more kids needing service than we can get to. But if I look at people's schedules being full, if I look at referrals to counseling, so not information protected by HIPAA, but information in general, that's how I would make that decision.
And applying it to other things too, like you had said last week, that you had considered, maybe just as a fleeting thought, even to invite parents to have their children enroll in a different school from where they are. Would something like that, other than right-sizing, does that affect financially? Is there any benefit financially to doing that?
No. We have
Okay.
done that traditionally to help parents out. For example, if I live in um, Glendale, but my babysitter's in Glen Warden, so I'd rather have my child attend at Glen Warden so the babysitter can pick them up there.
Okay.
Parents can make that request, and we move students around. It's, I can't actually remember the last year we moved students to balance enrollments. I think that might have been when we did that little tweak to the boundaries and changed some of Sunnyside and moved it to Lincoln. Does that sound right? Does that sound right when we were shifting boundaries, elementary people to push either some kids further up the hill towards Glendale and some change in the village? But parents always have, of our elementary students, have always had, since I came here, the option to request a school different than their home school for a multitude of reasons.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, I'm sorry, one more thing. Just going forward, can we please take off the slide that I said right-sizing art and music classes?
I can take that right
I'm
out.
just not comfortable with that being on there.
We'll take
because-
it out of there.
Thank you.
Make a note of that. We'd be happy to.
Will we be having some of those budget work sessions this year?
With the community,
Yes.
once you adopt, I usually do at least one.
Okay.
Has there been in the past like a survey for our community to do to see kind of where they lie? I know you probably only get like a 20% reply.
That's
but
exactly where I was going.
Has there been like a survey or anything in the past years to find out how they feel about it?
I want to say the last time we did that was 2012 or 13 when we hit the recession after 2008 and the ARPA money went away. And then we were faced with some pretty significant cuts. But I think that's the last time we were actually out surveying. The community that votes on the budget, which is not our whole community, but they're surveyed every year. It's optional though. So if you come to vote, you can fill out the survey and share your thinking with us in that regard. So we do have those survey results, but I would say that's a small sample because it is basically the folks who come out and vote.
I know I hear a lot that, you know, our community will pay more in taxes for our education for our students than they will for their home. So that, I've heard that a lot as budget season's coming up right now, that, you know, they want to preserve our education, and if we can do more, they would go over what we needed. But those are parents who have kids, so I was wondering if the survey would hit those who don't have students in school now, who, or never had children in the school district. Are they still willing to do that? So that was kind of my thought process there.
I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, to answer your question, Emily, we're the liaisons to the community, and so we do kind of, as our function, interact with a lot of folks, and because our primary function is our fiduciary responsibility to the budget here in the district, it's good to ask that question. And like him saying, we get asked a lot of those questions, especially around budget time. To answer your question, it really depends on the sample set you're in front of. As school-aged parents and folks, they're willing to pay a bit more, especially if there's a risk for losing something that they care about. And there's a great cross-section of that. Generally in the community, in the budgets in the last decade or 20 years, since you've been here, since 2005, have been between 2% and 3%. And so that's palatable. People don't really want their taxes to increase, but it's proven to be a number that folks are willing to. And they understand that things increase 2% to 3% every year, so it does make sense. I do know that when the number 4% was kind of flying around this year, it's a big eye-opener. Folks don't really love that. So working to where you've got that's fantastic. I will tell you that losing sections is I don't think anybody really loves that. I know with our trends, it's something that we have to talk about, but that's something that I haven't heard anybody be really okay with. So that's just giving you what I've heard.
Thank you.
And so if we were to like consider, this is a great place to get to, but if anything that folks may not like that was on that list, it might be that kindergarten section. I can imagine out of that list, that would probably get the least votes, community. So that's what I have to offer tonight.
Thank you.
So my question was almost what you asked us, because this is the first time I remember being on the board that we've actually went in depth with what a contingency budget was and what would happen. So my first red flag was, are you hearing that this might not fly in the community if we went out at the original first budget versus the second? And are we trying to get this down? Obviously, we don't want to raise taxes, but are we trying to do it so it is historically in that 2 to 3 versus going out a little bit higher so we don't have to lose a section or a teacher?
Correct. No, I am not hearing anything about contingency. Because I do have concerns about, did have concerns about, and still do, out at 4 or more. I just want us to make sure that as you make a decision about adopting, that you have considered what the repercussions are if we are not successful. Because it would be incredibly painful.
Right.
Has there been a time that that's ever happened? That we've gone out like really high?
That, for us personally,
Like, yeah, as a school
not in
district.
the 18 years I've been here. I think Pam could speak to maybe before I came when we weren't under a tax levy limit and
We never, it's, in my memory, 3% has kind of been a magic number the whole time I've been on the board. It's like nothing written down or anything like that is 3%. But it seems like the public and our constituents are fine with a 3% increase. And that's why it's kind of like in the back of my head. That's why I asked you last week, what would you get rid of? How would you decrease to get down to 3%? I just feel like it's our responsibility to do the best we can for our community. And if we can have a really good educational program and stay at 3%, then I think that's what we should be doing. I've always seen, over all these years I've been on the board, there's only been once or twice that the budget has ever gone down. And it was a really bad year to have to go to a contingent budget. So I think the public expects us to do what we can to keep a reasonable increase. I think that's our responsibility.
And again, I'm not asking you to make a decision tonight. I want you to consider this. We will come back next week, talk a bit more about the 3-part budget, where our spending is, where our revenues are, what that would look like in contingency. You can look at what I've done with Drew's assistance and my team's assistance. We can talk about those items. If there's something that has you worried or concerned, I can talk a bit more, if it would be helpful, about the elementary migration on sections, where that will actually fall this year, if you'd like me to do that. So we can give you some more information. But when we leave next Monday, we should be in a point where you have an idea of what that spending cap will look like, and we will be ready to adopt the following week, April 3rd. Drew, what do you want to add to what's going on here?
One of the things I always present is the look forward, the implications of what we are doing in the ensuing year to the following years. So I kind of laid that out. And again, my job is to keep things smooth. And I think for 16 years, you haven't seen highs or lows. You kind of seen the stability of it through working with the board, the superintendent, administration. That's my objective, is that we don't go too high above the water or too far below it. I think this presentation delivers that and puts us in a position next year not to have too much of a tumultuous surge, because the aid will come down next year. Inflation will come down next year.
And our grant money will be
Our
gone.
grant money will be gone next year.
So does that sound like a plan for next week?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Karen, I could ask you what you think or you're hearing in the community. Nothing.
Take a note, sorry.
No, it's okay. You're right, Karen, here's nothing.
All right, thank you. Moving on, no other budget questions, we'll move to other business.
I put together this list of intramural activities as I was able to determine for you. Rick, I decided once I got looking, I might as well see what everybody was doing. There's only one that's here for middle school, but you've got an idea of what's going on. Lincoln's clearly leading the way. But that's where we are right now.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Susan, I take it that SAC doesn't have anything?
Not that we're aware of right now.
Once upon a time, we had a lot more than this.
Pam, these are just the intramurals. I think that we have clubs running in
Yeah, oh,
every, so this isn't
absolutely.
clubs in intramurals. This is specific to
Well, we used to
intramurals.
have volleyball teams, and we used to have softball and baseball teams that weren't, affiliated with the district ones. But in the schools, they played each other in the buildings. I'm surprised actually at how little we've gotten down to.
Any other business by anyone? No, with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
I'll motion to adjourn.
Give a second.
Oh, second.
Thank you, Pam. In favor?
Hi.
Opposed? Abstained? Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.